I know you're sick about hearing about the depression stuff, and I know those videos don't do well, but I need the catharsis today, and I don't want to pay £40 or more to pay someone professional to listen to me, so you get it in the ear. So, a couple of things prompt me to make this video. The first one is that I have applied for the various forms of financial help that I may be entitled to. I've been putting this off for a very long time because it's essentially a shameful situation to be in, to feel that you need to do that. And there is a lot of social pressure on people who are ill, even with physical disabilities, not to claim because it's seen as scrounging and so on. And that's worse for people with mental illnesses. And as I predicted, I did get a trolling comment on my Ask FM, which has somehow mysteriously vanished since. I'm guessing someone reported it as abuse or whatever, so please don't do that. Leave them up, especially if I reply to them. There's a reason they're there. And that's a troll comment. It's essentially meaningless, and probably spurious as well. But it served a purpose because people do genuinely believe the things that were expressed in that troll comment. There are people who feel that way, that anyone who claims any kind of assistance must somehow be a scrounger or whatever and doesn't deserve it, and regards depression as being a little bit sad or whatever. So, even though that's a spurious comment, I like to turn things into something useful, and it would be useful to stop hiding and lying, I suppose, and to tell people what the experience of depression is like, and how it's not just being a little bit sad or whatever, and that how asking for assistance may perhaps be justified, but believe me, I feel ashamed of having to go for help, and bad about asking for it, even though I've been paying my national insurance contributions and so on for years. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is that in filling out this paperwork, I've been looking to find exactly how long I have been ill for. And I don't have proper records on that. So I ended up having to go back through old blogs and so on for some kind of clue, and even back to old abandoned blogs, such as the ones I had on LiveJournal, which I guess is an appropriate place to announce you've got mental health issues, since replaced by Tumblr, but it used to be LiveJournal. And I discovered that basically this year is the 10th anniversary of my diagnosis. And somehow I had it in my head that it was only, I don't know, half that amount of time. And so that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. 10 years. And kind of knocked me off my feet a bit until a friend of mine said, look at it this way, you've been kicking its ass for 10 years. You're still here. Which is a much better way of framing it, I guess, rather than seeing yourself as being a useless crip for 10 years, I suppose. So yeah, I want to give you an insight into what it is like, given this is the 10th anniversary of my official brain fuck. So, gloves off, this is what it's like. For one thing, just to make things extra difficult, different people experience depression in different ways. These are the things that are true for me. This is how I have experienced it and had it. So when I first got ill, it wasn't at all like depression. at all. I didn't think it was. I didn't want it to be that. I'd had a teenage bout of depression, triggered by a bad and ongoing breakup and a few other things. So I thought I knew what depression was like, but that was triggered by events and sort of general background radiation of life at the moment, teen angst and whatever. And this was different. And what I experienced it as was extreme exhaustion, aches and pains. It was like having the flu and having been up 48 hours. And it was like that constantly. You know, there were aches and pains, pain when I moved. I was just absolutely leaden and could barely move or do anything. No motivation, no energy. I just wanted to sleep all the time. That was how it hit me at first. And these symptoms felt and sounded like chronic fatigue syndrome or yuppie flu, or any of these kind of things. So that's initially what I went to the doctor for. I feel exhausted all the time. I've got no energy to do anything. And to start with, they agreed with me, and we started doing tests. Blood was taken, reflexes were checked, all of this, and nothing really seemed to match up with how they diagnosed chronic fatigue syndrome or viral exhaustion or any of these other things. But I was really stubborn. I kept insisting that this must be what it is. More tests, please. Maybe it's a more obscure version or whatever. And eventually they kind of beat me down into accepting that depression was the only thing that it could be. And that kind of coincided with a shift in how I was feeling, and I did start to feel sad, so to speak. But people don't seem to understand that depression can manifest physical symptoms, these aches and pains. It is like having the flu, a really bad case of the flu, minus the sniffles and sneezing and whatever. It's just you ache, every part of your body is leaden. That's basically what it's like. This physical side, and then there's the mental side. So sadness doesn't cut it. Of the kind of more conventional emotions that you can suffer, I think it's closest to grief. If you've ever lost someone really close to you, or you've had a pet that you really loved die, that is the closest thing you will experience to depression. It is absolute anguish, and it feels like something that you can't do anything about. It is all-consuming. It is like this big gaping hole in your life, only nothing is actually missing, except your marbles, I suppose. That's the closest thing to what it's like. This absolute yawning chasm of despair that you can get completely lost in. All analogies fail. The thing is, even when you're not depressed, if you have ongoing depression, it's always lurking in the background, tracking you, like Churchill's black dog, looming somewhere in the background, waiting to grab hold of you again. So in that way, it can even ruin the times when you feel okay, because you're in constant anticipation of the next bout of feeling like absolute shit. It's always there, lurking. It just kind of varies in size, I suppose, or intensity. When you're really down, the depression is the only thing that exists. It's like being in a completely pitch black, lightless room, and other times it's more of a fog. And fog is another way that it can affect you. It slows your thinking, as though you're exhausted. It makes everything seem dull and grey, and that exhaustion isn't just physical. It is mental. So being depressed makes things harder. Makes it harder to think, harder to concentrate. Errors creep in. And if you do work that requires you to use your mind, you're going to make more and more errors as you get deeper into depression, and that can feed the depression, especially if you have something like imposter syndrome, like you already think that you're a fraud or whatever, which a lot of creative people suffer from. Then the depression itself can make that more self-fulfilling, because you make errors, miss simple things, screw up, get fatigued, and so on. But in grief is the main thing that I would compare it to, and it can exacerbate other problems that you have, like the imposter syndrome. Despite my long career and my successes in making games and so on, even though I've upset a lot of people, but I still normally, under normal circumstances, have confidence that this is something I can do and that I can do well. But occasionally I do feel this sense that I don't deserve it, or I'm not very good, or whatever, and the depression feeds that. It's like, I characterize it as being like a schoolmaster telling me off. That's how I picture it in my head. Oh, you'll never amount to anything. You're rubbish, useless. You'll never pass your exams. That sort of thing. You could, I guess, characterize it as a nagging wife, or some other manifestation. But it's like having this constant voice talking you down, telling you you're shit, telling you you're good for nothing. So that's another aspect of it. I don't mean an actual literal voice. It's not like schizophrenia or whatever, but just this constant self-questioning. Ironically, that can be an upside to depression. If you're constantly self-questioning and re-examining what you're doing, it can add a level of polish and perfectionism, which can be useful in endeavors like writing. So yeah, if there's a silver lining, that kind of doubt and self-questioning and fixation can have a slight upside, I guess. It's a bit of a reach, but it's there. And then there's the suicidal ideation, which is an outgrowth of that. So you feel that you're worthless, you're not good for anything, you get exhausted from being depressed, and there doesn't seem to be any way out of it. And even when you do feel better, you feel it lurking in the wings, waiting to come back, and you want some kind of escape. If you felt grief, you'll know how you try to drown it out. You try to distract yourself, or you get drunk, or you find ways to cope and blot it out until it has time to ease and go away. But depression doesn't ease and go away. You can blot it out sometimes, and it ebbs and flows, but it never really truly goes away. And that, at least for me, is what leads to the self-harm and the suicidal thoughts, is just wanting relief from this never-ending horrible feeling and this worthlessness and so on. And it tricks you and it fools you. People think that suicide is selfish, but when you're in the depressed mindset, in the suicidally depressed mindset, you see it as doing other people a favor. You don't want to be a burden anymore. You don't want to grind them down. You're tired of boring them with your emotional problems and issues and needing them to hold you up or whatever. So your brain reframes the act of suicide into something that is not selfish but selfless. It's a kind of martyrdom for the sake of your family and friends. They would be better off without you. So on top of everything else, it lies to you and makes you feel that doing something horrible to yourself would actually be doing people a favour. So when you call suicide selfish, it might be, but to the person who does it, it probably wasn't and didn't feel that way. Rather, it was a supreme act of love for other people and self-sacrifice. Because depression fucking lies to you. In living with depression, you find ways to cope with it, or you're given ways to cope with it, and sometimes these can be as bad in their own or in different ways as being depressed itself. So you get very adept at hiding the fact that you're ill. You don't want to worry people, you don't want to bother people, so you end up keeping it to yourself. And even when you do want to reach out for help, you don't, because you don't want to worry and upset people. You know, you might just need to talk. This is a big issue that I have. I live in an isolated area. If I want to communicate and socialize, a lot of it has to be done online. But since a few really bad times have happened to me, every time I say anything about how I feel, certain people tend to overreact. You know, and maybe I just need to talk. Maybe I don't want to kill myself in that moment. Maybe I'm just feeling down. But certain people tend to overreact. And that kind of robs me of that outlet. And I've seen this happen to other people as well. You know, you get either people get too upset, which is nice in its way, but makes it difficult to talk. Or again, you don't want to burden people by doing something like making a overly long video about one of the worst possible subjects, for example. So that's an issue. You get good at hiding it, and you stop wanting to talk to people because you don't want to worry them. And with reference to online stuff, you know, as I talked about at the beginning, you also, you know, you get trolled. So talking about being ill brings people who want to beat you down for being ill. In the same way, parading a political opinion or whatever else is bound to attract people who are contrary, or to identify your buttons to people who will then happily push them like a retarded monkey all day long. So that's an issue. You get good at hiding things, and there are reasons why you might do that. Then there's self-medication. So you might throw yourself into something like a hobby or whatever until it becomes completely all-consuming and you don't do anything else that's productive. But the thing is, you won't particularly have a lot of energy for that hobby or whatever because of the effects that depression has on you. Like even playing computer games, which is something I find a useful distraction. The only ones that really work for me are things that are fairly repetitive and simple. Like Minecraft could be creative, but a lot of the actions are repetitive. Diggy, 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 build, build, build. You know, laying down a wall or a structure, it's a repetitive action. Or grinding in an MMO or Destiny or something. You know, just you can click off your brain and just do one thing after another. But you can't do that forever. Other forms of self-medication might involve drugs or alcohol. I've never particularly gotten on with illegal drugs, so I'm fairly safe from that. Alcohol tends to make things worse, though, and that is something I've been known to do, and it's one of those last stops before getting really suicidal is to get absolutely shit-faced drunk, and in a lot of ways that gives you the Dutch courage and the numbness to do it. But it can also just be a coping mechanism for a lot of people. Getting fuzzy, letting your emotions out is a kind of it's a release. I think especially for a lot of men, we do repress our emotions and we are stoic, and that can be a really good thing. But sometimes when you need to let your emotions out, you can't. Without a little bit of help, and alcohol is good for that. That can turn you into a blubbering heap, but it can also dull you, distract you, make you numb, and that's a less than great coping mechanism. Treatment wise, there isn't a great deal available, and it's not necessarily the best possible treatment. I think this is particularly true if you're a dude. That's a subject for another time, really. And this is obviously the British experience. So, mental health issues, especially long-term mental health issues, which depression is likely to be, especially if you have 3 or more bouts of depression in your lifetime, then it's likely to be an ongoing, lifelong issue. But the first port of call is your GP, your local doctor, many of whom aren't particularly well trained on mental health issues. I've volunteered when they have medical students in to go in, because I want these medical students who are becoming doctors to be better at dealing with mental health issues. So I volunteer as a kind of test subject to try and make sure that the next generation of doctors are better at it. But they're not specialists, and basically all they can really do is give you pills, and if the problem remains ongoing, they can give you referrals to your local community mental health team or whatever. But the NHS quite understandably operates on a basis of triage. And mental health is a long-term, expensive issue with no real cure, and there isn't a lot they can do, and there isn't a lot of the money around. So, provided you can cope in some way, they will just leave it. There's no real way to truly make things better. There aren't the resources there. The local community mental health basically only offer talk therapy, emergency numbers, a contact who isn't really a therapist. It's cognitive behavior therapy is really all they offer, though it varies by postcode and where you are in the country. And if that's no good for you, you're basically shit out of luck. And you may be able to get a half-hour appointment with a psychiatrist once every 3 months. It is about it. I mean, they'll review the notes from your therapist or whatever, but for some people that will help. For others like me, other than a few exercises, it didn't really help. And part of the way I cope is to be angry, because I would rather be angry than sad, to intellectualize and rationalize and distance myself from my emotions, some of which are a few useful exercises I picked up from CBT, and humor. That's the other thing I use to cope. So those are my coping mechanisms, some of which stem from this therapy. I also saw a therapist, a humanist therapist, privately for a while, but that's expensive. The money soon piles up, and if you can't work, if you're that badly ill, there's issues. Most therapists will work with you to do payment plans, or they will discount, because a lot of them are good people who genuinely want to help you. But even so, going private is expensive and still may not help. I got a lot out of my humanist therapist, but eventually it stopped helping, and it just wasn't worth the cost anymore. So I let that drop. And then there's charities like Mind, who I've recently been in touch with and who have encouraged me to claim money and try and ease the financial burden, because that's one of the few things left for me to try and deal with. But to get in with charities who are also overstretched, you'll need decent referrals from your doctor and so on. And again, if provided you can really cope, even if it's not particularly well, they will let you because resources are limited. So provided you can bumble along on pills, the system will let you bumble along on pills. And medication is a whole other issue. I wouldn't put anyone off trying medication, going onto pills, maintaining them and so on, because they do help. But it's always a trade-off between the depression and the side effects of the pills. Now, I have a weird brain, apparently. Every drug that I've been on, I've had rare side effects. And I also seem to habituate to, I seem to grow immune to various drugs fairly quickly. So their effect diminishes quite quickly, and I need stronger doses relatively quickly, with the exception of the drug that I'm currently on, which seems to maintain its effectiveness. But I've been on a variety of drugs, and I have had many weird side effects. Night sweats, night terrors, falling asleep constantly, being unable to sleep, nightmares rather than night terrors. I'm getting those at the moment. Being unable physically to cry, when that would be an appropriate or a useful or cathartic thing to do. That's another problem. I've got that at the moment. There's a few points in making this video where I felt that I could have shed a tear or two, but it just wasn't happening. So that's a weird one. Depressed libido, but more commonly for me, but very unusually, kind of hyper-accelerated libido, like wanting to fuck all the time, which has its own set of issues. And then, if you're a creative worker like me, across all of these drugs, I have had problems with creativity. It makes me better at doing sort of mechanical, repetitive tasks, or dealing with paperwork and accounts and things like that. But when it comes down to being creative, and a lot of people report this, it becomes a lot more difficult while you're on the pills. So for me, it's a constant dosage balance, and that's not made easier by the fact that a lot of these pills, the drugs stay in your system for a long time, and they take a while to build up. So once you start taking the pills, you need to wait a couple of weeks for them to really sort of kick in, take effect, and relieve your depression. And then when you come off them, they continue to have an effect for a long time. So for a lot of these pills, it's very difficult to have any kind of reactive dose to what's going on in your life and where you need to be, because there's this medication lag, I guess you'd call it. But it definitely affects my writing and other things. So to wrap up this massively overlong video, I guess, how does this affect me in my day-to-day? Things that are absolutely routine tend to go okay, but anything outside of that routine is a source of massive anxiety and afterwards exhaustion. Anxiety very often goes along with depression, and makes it very difficult to step outside of your comfort zones. So, for example, I hate driving at the best of times. I can do the train station run without getting knocked over, but anything else, and any real problems or issues on the road, and that's me fucked for the day. Social anxiety is a big part of it for me. Like, even my closest friends, who I only see maybe every month and a half, but building up the energy, the emotional and physical reserves to go and see them can fuck me up for a week total. You know, there's the anxiety leading up, and then there's the exhaustion afterwards. Just the effort of being around people, dealing with people, coping with people. Sometimes suppressing how bad I feel and not wanting to spoil this time we've got together. We do tabletop role playing together. I'm usually running games, and that's where I prefer to be. That's my comfort thing. But always feeling like the games that I run are shit, and not good enough, not engaging, not interesting enough. So this is all more sources of stress. I don't think I could work in a conventional working scenario in an office or anything anymore. I started looking for work to ease this financial side and the domestic side where I feel like I'm not contributing enough. But then the thought of working in these places or having that kind of degree of responsibility, that's knocked me flat for a day or two. Even just sending in an application or deciding not to send in an application because of all this. You know, I don't think conventional work is something that's going to be a possibility for me because of this. And who's going to want to hire someone that can be knocked flat on their ass for a month and a half, 2 months, 3 months at a time, you know, and unable to really work? You know, even in my comfort zone, working for myself at my own pace or freelancing, and even with the mental health issues, I have been considered a fairly reliable freelancer in the past. Even in that, you know, I've barely been able to work this past 2 months or so. And when you're freelance and when you work for yourself, you know, there's no safety net there. There's no backup. If you're not earning, you're not earning, and that's simply it. And that's another source of stress. But it's also the only context in which I think I can work. Is this constant state of anxiety, fear, exhaustion, not feeling good enough, not feeling like you're contributing, and it all turns into a swirl and builds on itself. You know, there's everyday stuff like going to the shop can fuck up half my day. You know, just going to get bread and snacks and whatever. The effort of doing that means I can't really do anything else for half a day. And that's just to the village shop, you know, in a comfortable, well-known environment. It's worse having to drive to the Tesco or whatever, because you have to drive and get into town and cope with strangers and navigate your way around the store and make sure you remember everything and get all the right stuff. Normal everyday things become Tomb of Horrors style challenges. I hope all this has gone some way to convey to people what it's like. I don't think I've held anything back, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. I know this is way too long, but I guess this video is mostly for me, not for you. Zang.